Good afternoon. Well, it might be good morning for you, or good evening, whatever time it is. Welcome to Fan the Flames live with me, Robert Stevenson, the creative director of Fan the Flames, where we believe that everybody has that spark, has that desire, has that potential to create something, to have their roaring flames, to be lit up in the world. And today I'm here with Robbie Swale, and Robbie and I were just having a conversation before we got started, and I so enjoy being in Robbie's space because there's just this kind of you just feel like you can just keep going, you can just keep opening up, and I think that's the mark of a great coach who's embodied coaching into their being. So it's not just their job; it's part of their being and how they're showing up. And maybe we'll touch on that, maybe we won't. I don't know. As you know, we just go with what comes out here at Fan the Flames on the podcast. But let me pause a moment and let Robbie just do a little bit of an introduction about who he is, and then we'll dive into some stuff. Robbie, welcome to the show.
Yeah, Robert, thanks for having me. And what a lovely thing to say. Thank you. I guess that's one of the things I have noticed about myself in different ways, but also it's nice to have. It's something I'd hope, right? That the conversations just keep. I think you did a gesture. If not, I felt a kind of gesture like this. That's how the conversations can go, and I love that. And so I'm glad you get that feeling, and I'm glad that we're having another chance to speak one day. I saw someone. I saw someone posting on Twitter recently that like 21st century friendships is just finding the time for that is just finding the time to appear on each other's podcasts. So the only way to kind of develop a friendship in the 21st century is to keep appearing on each other's podcasts. So nice to be doing it this way around. Yeah, let me actually do what you said. So yeah, these days I have to introduce myself with more than one thing for sure.
Ooh.
So I'm not just a coach anymore. I have to start calling myself an author too, and I'm also definitely a podcaster. So I'm those things.
Own it.
Really, exactly. And the journey to owning those things is an interesting one, which we could definitely get into. Each of them, I always feel like it's like I don't know. It took a lot. It felt like it took a surprising amount for me to own. Oh yeah, I have to basically. Now I've got 4 books, for example. There's really no denying that I am in fact an author. The way I think about my work is that there are 3 main things that I'm interested in. So I'm interested in leadership, and that's where a lot of my, especially the one-to-one coaching happens. And that, because I also, like you, have a real interest in the hero's journey, in those kind of stories that follow that. One of the ways I think about it at the moment is leading with honor is a really interesting thing for me. I haven't really built or released anything about that, but I keep talking about it because I know for the right people, they'll hear that and they'll be like, that is the kind of leadership I want to do. Which for me means people who want to do the right thing even when it's hard, people who want to succeed without having to compromise who they are. And that's often the kind of either explicitly or implicitly some of the work that I'm doing with leaders cross sectors, cross levels of organizations. So I'm interested in leadership. I'm interested in creativity. And particularly, one of the reasons I reached out to see if we could have a conversation like this was because I love the way you talk about that spark of potential. And I'm really interested in that too. And I'm interested in why do we sometimes want to do something, like have a calling or an idea that we want to do something and follow it and not follow it. And I'm interested in that bit.
Yes.
What's happening there? And that's
Yes.
so that's what my 4 books are about. They're called the 12-Minute Method series. There's also a 12-Minute Method podcast. That's one of the podcasts. And then I love the craft of coaching. So I love supporting other coaches. That's how we first connected on my other podcast, the Coach's Journey podcast. I have a community for coaches, and I do some work there too. And the last thing to say about this, for some reason, this is in my mind now, is I'm just aware that it takes me quite a long time to say all that. And I used to feel like that wasn't okay, that I had to have one thing that I was interested in. And I'm very glad that now I can just this is where I am with what I know about what I do. There's those 3 things. We could talk about any of them or all of them.
I love that. So there's something there for me about, how do we own what we do? Because with some of the work that I do, especially around Fan the Flames, it's this conversation about secret desires. And even the other day I was talking to somebody and I talked about secret desires, and they said, oh, does everybody have a secret desire? And I said, I don't know, but I feel like we do. And she was like, because I don't have a secret desire. And I was like, okay, cool. That, maybe not everybody has one. I haven't done enough work to know the answer to that yet. And as we were just kind of chit-chatting, something popped up and they went, oh, that's my secret desire. That's the thing that I don't say out loud. And I was like, isn't it interesting, the stuff we don't own, we don't share, we don't put out there, and what's that about? And then even when we're known for something, because I know you as an author, I know you as a podcaster, and it's like, even when we're known for something, we don't always feel comfortable putting it out. And I guess part of that is what others say, think, or what we think they might say or think. It's all of that kind of gremlin stuff that's in the system.
Yeah, and the stories we have about whatever it is what the thing we're not owning. We have stories about. I certainly have stories about what counts, or what, like, if mostly the podcaster I listen to is Tim Ferriss, then I'm quite different to Tim Ferriss on all levels of everything. I mean, some people who know me and have listened to Tim might say, actually, we're quite similar in some of our obsessive, interest in things. But, like, what counts? What is a real, like, I I like this thing that we all often do. I've seen, like, clients I work with do. I've seen myself do it. It's like we change the definition of what counts to keep ourselves out of being the thing yet. So it's like, like I'm a coach when I've, because we both have worked with coach potential or new coaches, run coaching trainings. It's like, happens there a lot. It's like people's story for a while is I'll be a coach when I finish my training.
Yeah.
And they finish the training. It's like, well, I'll be a coach when I've got my ICF credential.
Yeah.
And they get the credential and they realize the credential doesn't really mean anything. And they have to be like, well, I'll be a coach when I've done certain things, and it just keeps going.
Yeah.
And that in some ways, sometimes that's okay, but sometimes it's holding people back or distracting from other things. And I felt that with the author thing quite a bit in different ways. I also have felt it with the, like, creative thing. And I've just remembered one. I did a workshop last year on, I've done this kind of workshop a few times on, with, called How to Be More Productive. And I realized one of the reasons I felt like an imposter doing that is my story of what productivity should feel like was that it should be like, I should be productive, which doesn't make any sense, by working, like, hugely hard all the time, by 7 days a week of hustle. And actually, despite the fact that, again, objectively, what have we just said? Four books, 2 podcasts, like, a business. And these days, since my daughter was born, I only work 4 days a week. Like, who can deny that that's productive? And yet it doesn't feel, according to my story of what a productive person is, which maybe is more like Ferriss, like the kind of, or the myth of Tim Ferriss of all the hacks and things like that.
Yeah.
It didn't fit with my story. But then if I slow down enough and look at myself in the cold light of day, there's some of these definitions that I just can't, like I said before, 4 books, like, who am I kidding? Of course, that's an author.
And there's also something about well, if I just lean into that, then I can be that, right? If I just, because when I was training coaches, and there was the thing of, well, when I've done half the course, I can say I'm a coach. I can tell people about it. When I finished the course, when I've completed the qualification, when I was always like, but what happens if you just say it? What happens if you've been to the first module, you've got some skills, you've got some tools in your toolkit, and when people say, what do? You go, I do this, and I'm a coach, or I'm a coaching training. What happens if you just own it? And it's quite interesting how some people go, I'm going to own it, and they build a website, and then it's like, you're like, whoa, hold on a little bit, and they're like out there doing it, and then there are others where we just, and I also wonder what sits in our family story, perhaps, about that, and about being big or being loud or being out there. So somehow, somewhere in our system, we go, that's a negative. So I'm not going to do that because I'll be seen as.
Yeah.
So I pull back from that. I was talking to somebody the other day about arrogance and confidence, and just going, by talking about what you do isn't arrogant, because it's what you do and it's what you're great at. So embrace that and share that out to the world. And they were finding that really difficult because their family system had always gone, that behavior is arrogant. So the label was that.
Yeah, I mean, it's so much in there. I really like for me personally, I've thought about that quite a bit. There's a nice, great frame in the book, The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks, which is a book I really like. I recommend to people always, where he talks about the upper limit problem, which is really his way of, he was a psychotherapist, or is a psychotherapist, I don't know. And he thinks most people have on some level, a deep story about how happy they're allowed to be. And then most of these break down into 4 different kind of broad categories of upper limit problem. And what happens is, just as you're about to get happier than you think than the story tells you you're allowed to be, you find ways to sabotage that. And like worry is a great example. One of mine is it's so funny. You can watch yourself doing it, and then you're like, once you've seen it, you can suddenly see it again. One of mine with my business is like, I haven't got enough clients. We'll flip to, I'm going to have too many clients soon. Like, I can do that in like an hour or less. And if you can catch it, it's obviously ridiculous, because if I have too many clients, I could just deal with that and it'll be great. But you can see these things in more serious ways, or more pronounced, deeper ways, often in ourselves and in others. When I was reading Hendrix's book, he outlines these 4 upper limit problems, and I read the first 3, or I was halfway through the third one. I was like, a bit like your friend yesterday. Well, the other day I was like, maybe I don't have an upper limit problem, because I'd read them and they obviously weren't me. It just had no. And then I read the 4th one. It was like, oh no. And the 4th one was like, the story is, it's not. I can't remember the language. It's really not okay to outshine others. So that's a story that I have, and I could tell you my family of origin and why that makes sense in some ways, but. It's a bit uncomfortable even to mention it, and it's still uncomfortable to kind of do the thing sometimes, but knowing about the stories that we have at least gives us that a little bit more chance to see them when they're happening and respond differently. And I think it's a really, also just to catch it, I think that thing you said, whenever there's a quality that we really don't like in other people, that's where I came across that kind of arrogance, confidence kind of thing. It really pays to look at it, because there's probably a little smidgen of arrogance. If I hate arrogant people and it really annoy me, it probably pays to think, well, what's the little bit of arrogance? Where could I do with a little bit of their arrogance to help me in my life?
Yeah. And I love that upper limit thing. I'm going to add that to my list. And we.
yeah. Sorry, man. Yeah, in this conversation, I'll probably give book recommendations. So it's part of my So if I do Hendrix's work and think about my zone of genius, which is the other thing in that book, part of it is like sharing the things that I know, the deeper parts of myself in the moment with people. Nice. Unfortunately, that includes books sometimes.
Beautiful.
So you might get those.
Well, I have no idea what I was going to say, but what I'm going to say is about the whole the book piece, because I know what I was going to say now. Upper limits, and isn't it interesting that somehow we create a limit for ourselves of how happy, how resourceful, how wealthy in its fullest dimensions we can be, and we go, well, that's my level, and then we just we get close to it and we sabotage it and crash down. And one of the things that I found recently is finding people that are above my limit that I see as okay. So I have some connection with that, I guess, has a psychological soothingness on me. So I'm able to be with them and hear their story of how they've surpassed my limit, but not feel any blame or shame in where I am in relationship to that. More an offering of, and this is possible.
Yeah. I think maybe it doesn't get quite talked about enough, but you see that that we understand it because there are communities springing up. That the internet, one of the things that it does, right, is allows for connection with people, and the importance of the people around us as we're transforming ourselves or doing things that transform us. It's like, so it's such a key ingredient, isn't it?
Yeah. I think one of my desires, one of my drives at the moment is to create communities in where we can do the work together, and we can support each other in that work. And that work for me is going, where's your light? Let's get your light burning bright, because We can sit in the darkness and we can sit in the cold and not do, but actually we can get out there and we can do, and we can do together. And I think there's something about when we're doing it, we allow others to see the opportunity that it's possible, so they can also do it.
Yeah, there's a thing that's in my mind now, and unfortunately, my brother told me the story once, and we couldn't track the attribution of it. So, if anyone knows, please let me know where this story is from, so I can start attributing it properly. But he heard someone say, I think it might have been a musician, that if you're going on a journey, could be a transformational journey, like you need 3 groups of people around you. You need those people, the first group of people that you mentioned, the people who are just above your level. So that you can see what's possible, exactly like you said. And then you need the second group that we've just been mentioning, which is like people to go on a journey with, the kind of peers who like show you that you're not going insane when you're freaking out, but also challenge you. Like when I was in one of those groups, it was like I felt it, like it was the challenge. It was seeing the amazing things that other people were doing, and actually being a little bit less, not so much inspiring me, but being like, oh wow, if they're doing that, like what am I doing? Like sitting around doing what I'm doing is not enough. And that's a kind of healthy competition, if you like, and not always fun, but like powerful for me. And then when I was in that community, I saw the real power of the third group of people that you need around you, which is people who are like speech marks behind you on this particular journey, to remind you how far you've come. Because I was in this group of peers freaking out because the other people in the group looked like they were doing better than me, forgetting that 3 years ago, the things I was doing would have been unimaginable to me. So to have those 3 groups, people ahead, people alongside you, and people to remind you how far you've come, who you can then play that kind of similar role for. It's I think that idea has been so useful to me. And every now and again, I'll realize, consciously or instinctively, that I'm missing one of those groups. And it's really useful. But also sometimes, I had this quite recently, actually. I went to a group kind of hoping it would be the middle one, and it was the other one and the one below. And that was like it wasn't, it's fine, but it meant that I got a really different thing from that group than I thought that I kind of needed in that moment. And I hadn't seen that until just now. So that's a great insight for me.
And what's interesting about when we go to those spaces where we think, right, I'm going to do the learning here, and we go, oh, wait a minute, they're doing the learning from me. That's also a reminder of how we need to catching some interesting words there, how it might be useful to shift our perspective of where we think we are and what position we think we hold. I remember going to a supervision intensive. It was like a 3-day supervision retreat, and I remember on the way there thinking, why am I doing this? Why am I putting myself through this pain? I'm going to be there, bottom of the rung, hanging on for dear life, and this is going to be really difficult. I'm not going to enjoy it. And there was still, I'm aware that there's story in there that we could unpick. However, what I realized within an hour of being in this room with this group of people was, no, they're not there. They're with me, or I'm with them. And isn't that interesting? And then it sort of made me go, oh, wow, this is where you've got to. Right now, where?
Yeah. What's really funny there, Robert, is I thought you were going to tell a different story. Because I thought you were going to say the thing which would be, I got to be completely honest, would be much more likely for me, which is that I'm going into I'd be going into a room and secretly inside. This is not always true, but sometimes I'll go in thinking, why am I going to this? What have I possibly got to learn from this group or these people? And why, I'm not really proud to say that that's sometimes where I go, but it's true. And one of the things I really admire about you, I just noticed as you were saying that, is you seem, at least, we don't know each other that well, but you seem to have a real humility. And particularly, I think, in the second interview we did on my show, in this most recent phase of your career, this real openness and curiosity, which I really admire. And I guess there's those two. There's probably many, but there's those 2 stories that I think I see as quite common. One is, why am I going here? I'll be completely out of place because of how inferior I am. And the other is, why am I going? There's nothing here for me to learn. And neither are ever fully true, right? They're both too extreme. They're too black and white. to ever be fully true. But what I caught, when you were first talking there, it's like it's so important that we have so much. We have so much ability to affect how we are in a group of people, in all the ways, and mostly by the time you're going to the event, right? Anyone's going to the event. If you're actually going, you want to get in the best possible space for that event. You don't want to be too smug in the story I was telling, or too fearful in the story you were telling, to get anything out of it, to make any connections. So we have to get, in the end, to a curious, open place. And I think we have to. I'm being maybe a little much saying that the smug is where I'd go by default, because I think I'd often, maybe I veer from one to the other, the kind of smug one, or the I have to remember what I have to offer sometimes. So it's like, actually, look, I'm here. Even if I am out of place, what can I don't want to hide who I am for that old Gay Hendricks upper limit problem story of not outshining people. Like, if I'm in the room, like, let's actually fully be there.
Yeah. So it reminded me of, I was talking with, I was doing a bit of group supervision the other day, and a few of the coaches introduced themselves as new coaches, and they were kind of heading towards this. So we won't have much to say to support anybody because we're new. And I was kind of going, but you're going to bring the gold, right? Because all of us old coaches, stuck in our ways, a little bit
seen it
sure
all
of ourselves, you're going to shine a light on the stuff that we can't see. And that's the reason to have a mixed group, because we shine lights in different areas, because we've all got our little Johari window at play. And so let's shine some lights and see, oh, I see it like this, but you're seeing it like that. Wow, what happens if I see that? Oh, okay, that's interesting. How do I take that on? And by going, I might be new to this craft, whatever that craft might be, or skill, but I still bring the richness that is me into the space.
Yeah, and it's just so many. I mean, again, there's so many little ways that we could jump off there. One thought was, what you have to kind of double click on, what does new mean? Because I remember 2 years into coaching, someone said to me, he said, how long have you been doing this? I said, oh, about 2 years. And he said, oh, you've been doing it a while then. And I was like, sorry, what? I've only just got here. Like, what are you talking about? But it was true. And suddenly I realized in that room, 2 years was actually becoming quite a while. But in a way, I think one of the really interesting things in that idea of that group, where the new person is going to pull back a little bit, is like what the stories that people tell again about themselves, about other people, and what counts. And one of the things I've noticed since having the books, I've realized that no matter how, like, I might tell the story about what it means for me to have the books and dismiss that and all that kind of thing, some people who, for example, have tagged me on a LinkedIn having used some of the stuff that I've written to write something or something like that, they absolutely love it when the author of the book they've read rocks up in their LinkedIn thread. And it's really meaningful for them, even though I know inside I'm still like little me. And why should that be meaningful to anyone? So it's like, people, I guess in one of the things we're talking about is how we individually give, take away, and assign power and meaning and all these things to people and ourselves at different times. And I guess for anyone who's listening, this is resonating with, one of the things we're saying is you can mess with that quite a lot in yourself.
Yes.
And also that, don't assume that the person who looks like they're in some ways successful or where you want to be feels like that. So much in there, isn't there? It's really interesting.
I think there's a real richness in the, what's the game I can play with myself to mess up my thinking enough that I don't get caught in my story. When I walk into that space, because I know when I'm going somewhere and I'm nervous or I'm anxious or there's something rocking for me, I go, what's your story, dude? What's the story you're telling yourself about either what's going to happen or what's already happened? And how do you let that go? And then what's your desire here? Because your desire is to connect, your desire is to have fun, your desire is to inspire, your desire is to learn. What are those? And allow those to come through. and then you're gonna have a great time, regardless of what happens. If you're allowing, your desires or your somebody might call them needs, but I like the word desire because that's got a bit.
Yes, it's a much better word.
It's got a bit of to it, and I like that. It's like, and I guess this also comes back to, not back to, because we haven't really talked about this, but this idea of knowing what your desire is and being really honest with yourself and going, this is what I really want here. I want this. How do I make that happen? What's the facets of me, the greatness of me? I think you spoke about this already, but how do I need to be to get the juice out of this? Okay, how do I show up like that? Because that's me, or a facet of me. Allow that to shine and to be bright in the world.
Yeah, and I just want to catch it because it's the second time this thought has gone through my mind, and if that happens, I want to make sure we say it. So, because it relates to that, and it relates to some of the stuff we've been saying earlier. Like a really good trick, which I've used a lot. Now, for me, I'll tell you what mine is, but people can do different ones. Is you could do I'm amazed by how effective this mind trick is. It's the messing with your thinking thing. So, particularly when I had, earlier on in my business, still happens sometimes, but particularly early on, particularly around money stuff, I would a lot of the time be second guessing myself, getting very stressed out about how much my services should cost, whether I should charge in certain cases, all that kind of thing. The thing that got me out of that a lot of times was asking myself, what would a really successful coach do?
Yeah.
And it's like, it shouldn't work because it's so obvious. Like, it's such a ridiculous question to be able to ask yourself and know instantly the answer, right? Never basically with that question, I've never gone, I don't know. It's always obvious and pretty much. And that shouldn't, and then I can connect to the long term. What that really is doing, I think, is connecting me to my values as a business person, to how I think business should be done. So it's the doing business with honor thing rather than the easy thing. But you can do it with anything. One of my favorite ones was on a group program I was on. One of my friends who was on the program, I met on the program, she decided that for her holiday, she was gonna keep asking herself, what would Beyonce do? As Beyonce being the classic example, the archetypal, bold, confident, hugely charismatic woman that my friend was kind of wanted to let more out. And then someone told her, and I had kind of known this in the back somewhere and completely forgotten, that Beyonce has an alter ego that she uses on stage to become that person. So it's super cool. So she's got an alter ego called Sasha Fierce. And when I don't know if she still does it, but it certainly was a story she used to tell. To go on stage, she would be Sasha Fierce. So what I love about that is it's back to that thing we said about the people you're aspiring to be like may not feel like the person you're aspiring to be like. So even Beyonce needs to do that mind trick on herself to be Beyonce. And so that means that we can all do the mind trick, and it's worth it.
It's reminded me of two people that I work with and for and around. Elke Edwards of Ivy House and Johan van Bavel of Co-Creation Intentions over in the Netherlands. And with Johan, he talks beautifully about there's this triad of the saboteur, the future self, and the hero self. And he talks about what are the qualities that are in you that exist in your hero self, and to name that hero self. And then in a challenge, you go, so what would my hero self do?
Mm-hmm.
Or if you're going, I'm not sure what's happening here. What would my future self say? And then go, oh, who's talking? Is that me or is that my saboteur having a conversation with me right now? And I love this idea that there's this hero self that you can, it's almost like you call forth into the world and they go, right, I'm going to take over and I'm going to do what needs to be done here in the space. And there was something about that I just found really juicy.
Yeah, I love that. I'm going to be thinking about that. The future self thing reminded me. So I think this is a thing that I think this is a question that I've actually made up myself. But if it isn't, again, if somebody knows that I've stolen this, tell me. But when I want to guide somebody through, so we haven't really talked about it. When I want to guide somebody through setting up a 12-minute method style practice, like how do I grow a capability? And in a way, this question could be a way to find out the secret desire too. The question is, like, what will your future self wish that you'd been doing for the, like, so you might say, what would you of the future you of 5 years time wish that you'd been doing regularly for the last 5 years?
Yeah.
Or something, you can do it on yourself from now. You can say, what do I really wish I'd started doing 5 years ago and been doing just like regularly ever since? Like, what would I be really glad? And for some people, it's like, oh yeah, like keeping my LinkedIn up to date. And for some people, it's like, well, imagine if I'd been doing 5 sit-ups a day for the last 5 years, like things would be quite different. And for some people, it's a creative thing. It's like, but the future self one is really nice because sometimes you ask it and you're like, oh yeah, it would just be like, well, for me at one point, it would have been like, I basically asked the question and it was like actually sorting my money out, like just doing a tiny bit of sorting my money out regularly for the last 5 years. And then it turned out it didn't even take 5 years to get my money in vague order. But these things that are like, because it also, the other thing I like about that kind of question, like what would you have 5 years in the future, your 5-year future self wish you'd been practicing for 5 years? It's like, it doesn't say where do I want to get to? It's not that I get stuck in overwhelm. Like the money thing is like, well, just do it. Like, for me, it's like, well, every time I get paid, my future self would really wish that I'd been putting a bit of money in a tax account and a bit of money in a savings account and a bit of money in my current account and a bit of money staying in my business account, like every time. And that's then once I know that, that's really easy because actually that's like 4 payments on my internet banking, once every time I get paid, which is a thing that any idiot, including me, can do. Whereas like getting my finances in order, like what the hell does that mean? And how the hell do I do it? So, yeah.
So I'm aware that I listened to, I think it's on your website, but it could be on your YouTube, where you talk about the journey to 12 minutes and that 12-minute method. And I'm aware that I listened to that and it just helped me to go, then it's just a little bit. It's just a little bit. And I was talking to somebody else about it and I was going that, isn't it funny that as coaches, or as a coach, I'll own it, isn't it funny that as a coach, when somebody says to me, my goal's this, and I go, what's the so you can do that, and then I go, right, I want to do this, and I forget to go, what's the that I need to do that. And I remember when you were talking about, I think it was writing on the train and realizing the journey was an amount of time and going, oh, I can just do that during that time period. That thing of going, oh, isn't that amazing where we can just find a small thing, do that, but not put any pressure on ourselves to do it. Because gym is my classic. The gym is my go-to, where I go, I'm going to go back to the gym. I'm going to go 27 times a week. I'm going to do this workout. I'm going to lift this much weight. I do it 3 times and I'm overwhelmed and I don't go back.
Yeah. And you of 5 years time would be much happier if you'd been and done a mediocre workout once a week for the last 5 years than done 3 workouts at the start and then none for the next 4 years and 51 weeks, right?
So I think I owe this to you, but my new gym routine is I go twice a week and I pop in, I do 1 circuit of stuff and I come home.
Yeah.
And that's quite nice.
Yeah, I had a client where we were working on, amongst other things, physical health, and I can't remember what the initial thing was, but to get the client going, we started with, for her, it was a really light thing. I can't remember exactly. It was like 2 visits a week. Like, I'm going to start with 15 minutes on the cross trainer. And it turned out actually for her, that was enough. Yeah. And she started getting to that thing of like, imagine if I do this, just this. The difference between like those 2 lines, the line of what happens if I do nothing, and the line of what happens if I do two cross trainers or 1 circuit each time I go, is the difference between the status quo and that over time compounds into something absolutely massive.
And I think that's what it is. I know for me is I want it yesterday.
Yeah. Me too, right? Like, I should say that all of the stuff that I make is basically tested on myself. It's like there's a Toni Morrison quote that I'm not going to remember. It's something like, maybe I'm going to remember it. Toni Morrison said something like, if there is a book that you want to read, but it isn't written yet, you have to write it.
Yeah.
It's not quite, it wasn't quite like that how I wrote my books, but it was like, the person that needed the books about beating procrastination and finally doing the things that they wanted to do was me. And thankfully isn't so much anymore.
So tell me a bit about your books, because we've kind of hinted towards them as we've been having this conversation. Give me where's the core? If there is such a thing, what's that sits with them?
Yeah, well, and in a way, it's what we've been talking about. It's the core of the practice over outcome. You know, I didn't know that at the time, but that's like how they were created. And is, I think, as I've looked back, and, you know, in the 12-minute method podcast I mentioned before, I decided it'd be interesting to think about all the things that I had wanted to do, not done for sometimes a very long time, but finally done. Like, what were the patterns in finally doing those things? And there's kind of 14 of them that I could identify across my life. And a big one of them was detaching from outcome and focusing on action, if you like. So not getting stuck by not getting stuck by any of the things that keep us out of action, but particularly not getting stuck by attachment to an outcome and bringing it into practice. And I can, for people who don't know, I think I know the video that you're talking about, so we can just point people at that. But would it be interesting for me to tell a little bit of that story about how the book came about?
Let's tell the story, please.
So essentially, it was 2016, and I was working with a coach, and we'd noticed this thing that was happening, which was that I was really, like, sharing anything about myself on the internet was a kind of agonizing process. Now, interestingly, recently I was reading a thing by the blogger Tim Urban, who was saying that he didn't used to have that. He's been blogging for 10 years, say. And then in around 2016, when the world went weird, I don't know if anyone remembers the world going really weird in 2016 and lots of the internet becoming very horrible places to be. He said it got weird in 2016, so it might have been the time. But I was really noticing that, and it wasn't things I'd made just. It wasn't like, it was launching my coaching business, which happened about a year earlier, but it wasn't just that. It was also like making jokes on Facebook. I didn't want to do it anymore, or I would write them out and then delete them and then proofread them and then delete them. And this was happening kind of across it. And I knew that there were kind of a few things going on. I knew that wasn't really sustainable for me and my business, but it was also horrible. Like, I didn't want it to be like that. I wanted to be able to share things like me. I wanted to be, in 5 years, really, I didn't say this at the time, somebody who could share what they'd made, you know, with other people without feeling that agony. And my coach, Joel, who, you know, because you've been on Joel's Coaches Rising podcast, Joel Monk was the coach at the time. Joel and I designed a practice, it was to happen 5 times in 2 weeks, which was to write a short article on my train journey, which you mentioned before, from Clapham Junction to Waterloo. And then the game was going to be right on the train, proofread the article just once and post it on LinkedIn, because no one reads LinkedIn. That was the game, at least in 2016. And that was much more true in 2016. It wasn't quite. What I really meant when I thought that was, none of the people who I'm really afraid of what they'll think or say about what I've made are on LinkedIn. They were all on Facebook. And Facebook was meaner than LinkedIn. It still is. Not as mean as Twitter, of course, but meaner. And so I did that over the 2 weeks, and we'd done some work on writing already. You know, I won't go into that, but so it wasn't total standing start, but it pretty much was. And then at the end of the 2 weeks, it wasn't fun to do that, I need to say. It was kind of agonizing. It, like, the way I think about it now, it wasn't fun or nice, but I could tell even then that it was good. You know, it was like a good thing for me. It's like going to the gym, right? I don't find it fun to do weights. I find it quite dull. And, you know, I try and avoid doing it. But when I've done it, that's the best kind of workout that I do. And I know that it's really good for me. I can feel it. And it was like that. And so at the end of the 2 weeks, I decided to keep it going, but I made the decision that it wouldn't be that I was doing it like every time I got the train in those 2 weeks. That I made the decision that after the 2 weeks I was going to carry it until Christmas, but that doing it every time I got the train was too much. And that I'd do it just once a week. And I'm really glad I made that decision. I did it until Christmas, once a week, and then I've been doing it once a week ever since, which is now 6.5 years. So there are about 300 blog posts written in one sitting like that, proofread once and posted online, there on LinkedIn and my website. And at some point when I stopped getting the train, I checked how long the train journey was. It was 12 minutes. And that's where the 12-minute method comes from. So now I sit with a timer, write for 12 minutes, proofread it once, post it online. And then the reason that this is where the books come from is things got another level of interesting about 3 years in, when, inspired by some other people, I thought I could publish a book of my blog, because there was loads of them. And LinkedIn is it's hard for me to find my own articles on LinkedIn, let alone for someone else to go back and find my blog. And I thought maybe, I did the marketing trick that I always do on myself, which is when I'm procrastinating on it, which is, well, how many people need to be really glad or impacted by the fact that you've turned this into a book for it to be worth the stress for you? And the answer for me is always one. Yeah. So if one person will have their life affected by what I make, I need to do it. I need to get over myself and do it. And so I thought it'd be funny. Also, I could call the book, I wrote this book in 12 minutes. That was my original plan, which appealed to my humor. And I got my friend Steve, who's a copywriter, he was going to edit it a bit with me, gently edit it to make it work. And he said a great question, like a transformational question, which is, it's a great title because it says to me, if Robbie wrote a book in 12 minutes, I better do the thing I've been putting off. But he asked the question, can the book itself do that? And then this really kind of amazing thing happened, which was I looked at what I'd written in those first 3 years. And it turns out, because I'd been writing about what I was interested in and writing about what I was working on, and I'd been wrestling with my creative battles and starting a business and writing and all these things, and I've been coaching people on the things they wanted to do but weren't doing, I'd been writing about that the whole time. And so I had written not just, so the 80,000 words is what 12 minutes a week for 3 years got me, but it wasn't just 80,000 words about nothing or about everything. It was 80,000 words really about how we finally do the things we've been meaning to do. And in the end, that became the 4 books in the series, at the core of which is, well, the 4, which are each about one stage of the creative process as I identified them, which is you have to start at some point, you have to keep going and not give up, which is like the three workouts, right? And then give up. You have to, if you want to keep doing your absolute best work, you have to calibrate as you go and like improve. You have to kind of tweak things. You have to find the things that help you do your best work. That's the 3rd one. And then you have to share it. You have to share the work at some point. That's for it to have the most impact it can. And that's the 4th book in the series.
That's really interesting. So when you said share it, all of it's interesting. However, when you said share it, it really made me think about the Fan the Flames process, because the last part of the process is share it. You got to get it out there.
When I first saw you talk about that, I loved it. Of course I did, because it's kind of this it's what I believe, right? As well.
Yeah, and I love this thing of keep doing it without a process, keep doing it as a process and not the end. Because I think we get so, if I'd have said to you, right, you're going to spend 3 years writing a book, you would have gone, that just feels like, and then all the pressures, who's going to read it, what they're going to say. But if you go, I'm just going to keep writing my thing, and then 3 years down the line, I go, what have I written, and what of that do I want to share? Has so much more ease to it and delight to it as well.
Yeah, and essentially, I'm working. One of the things I'm working on myself at the moment with my current coach is, what the distinction he likes is from an Italian guy called Assagioli, I think, which is love and will. In a way, it's feminine and masculine energy. Some people would call it, but one of the really nice distinctions, which I've just never seen before, is importance versus interest. So importance is the kind of will-focused masculine energy. I will decide this thing and then I will do it. And interest is a really different thing. Interest is curiosity. It's like, it's the more feminine, easeful, love energy. And what's great about that, I'm just noticing that in the way that you just reflected on that story, because interestingly, I have got another book written, which I tried to write, and it's been really hard work, and it's not out in the world. And that was in a way an importance book. It wasn't quite, but it kind of was. It was kind of that first thing. And when I think about that versus sit down every week, essentially asking the question, what am I most interested in writing about this week?
Yeah.
And writing for 12 minutes, a few hundred words. And like you say, much more easeful, and also much Yeah, much freed of the pressure of the outcome. And remember as well, what's interesting, of course, is there is a kind of like little thing here which is worth saying. My aim, like one of the ways to think about this is to use the practice to come from who do you want to become, not
Hmm.
what do you want to do.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
wanted to become someone who could share their work without it being agony. And then you can ask, well, what does that person do on a regular basis? Well, they share their work. It's really
Yeah.
obvious. They make something and then they share it. And then I practiced that. And probably not in 3 years, there was still some agonizing stuff in those 3 years, but somewhere between 3 and 4, probably, that happened for me. Essentially, I
Hmm.
became someone who can basically share anything I've made without agony. It's not quite true. Like when I was launching the 12-minute podcast, I did freak out quite a bit, but I got it out. And so that's, again, that's focusing on who we want to become rather than what we want to do is a really nice frame because that's a sound investment, right? Because if we want to become the hugely courageous person, in my view, who can make something and share it, and everyone who does that I'm incredibly admiring of, then that will always be that and we'll always have that with us. But if
Yeah.
publishing a book might sound like the thing, the secret desire, sound like a thing that's great, when you get there, it might be a bit empty.
Yeah.
But you'll always have the person you've become.
And and that who are we becoming is also very much in that space of transformational coaching, right? Who are we becoming? Who do we need to become so that the thing that we want to do becomes so small and irrelevant that we do it without even thinking about it? But so who do we need to be in
Yeah.
order for that to happen? This also reminds me of a lifetime ago when I was working with creative partnerships. I did some work with a guy called Robert Jarvis, and we had to document our work. We were working in school, so I was working with a teacher, and we had to do stuff together, creating creative launch points for educational work with young people. And he was like, you have to blog about this. We're all going to blog about our work. And I was just like, oh, Jesus Christ, this is going to be painful. He was like, but here's the thing, you only have to do it for 5 minutes. I said, oh, okay, this is interesting. And he said, and your start line is, I don't know what I'm going to write, but I'm going to sit here and write for 5 minutes until something comes. I don't know what I'm going to write. I'm going to sit. And he says, and then something will come about the work that you're doing, and then you just start writing that. And when the buzzer goes at 5, you press stop, you cut the beginning bit of I don't know what to write, and you publish the rest. And I didn't know he was a magician. That sometimes you wrote for 5 minutes and there was nothing. But sometimes an hour later, you'd be kind of coming up going, what happened? Because you were just so into it. But because you didn't have that pressure of you're going to write a 50,000 word essay and publish it, it was just a 5 minutes. So, well, I can do 5 minutes every time I go into school, which was once a week. You come and you write about it for 5 minutes. And it's just that interesting. But also sometimes you'd publish it and sometimes you wouldn't, because sometimes it would only be, I'm going to write for 5 minutes. But you got in a habit. Once a week, this was the thing you did. This was the thing you did. And then your system was like, oh, right, we're ready for doing that. And then the layers on top of that, which I know now and I didn't know then, would be, so what's the conditions do I need to create so that when I sit down to do that, I'm at my best to make it happen?
Right, absolutely. Now, the thing I would say about that is I had after I'd published the third book, which is called How to Create the Conditions for Great Work. So it's like the third part in the creative process that I'm describing. I kind of regretted putting it third because it's like that's a place where we get lost sometimes. So I just always want people to be really wary of creating. Like you can create the conditions, you can create good conditions or better conditions if you want, but as soon as there's even a hint of create the perfect conditions or the right conditions, no, just do the work.
Because you could spend a day
just get practice at starting, keeping going, and sharing your work before you start faffing around getting your desk right. Like that's the like
how did you know that's figurative.
I think of like exams. I don't know if you did this. Like revision timetable was always the first thing that I did. Now that doesn't make any sense. Like don't do that. The revision timetable, it sounds like it helps me, but no. Like start off, do some revision, do some work, make something. Later on, if you need to, you can calibrate, and you'll be calibrating then with much more information.
Yeah, you've got the data, right? You know what it feels like. You know, if you get up every day and you write every morning, you at some point you go, mornings aren't right. I need to do it in the afternoon, or I need to do it in
Yeah,
the early evening, or whatever it might
and
be.
that would happen for me. Like, it's less good when I do it on the way home from work rather than the way to work. For
Yeah,
example, was probably one of the things I learned. But I just want to catch, like, just to make it really clear, because you've just told that great story about the 5-minute timer. The timer is incredible and hugely underrated. I have a really rubbish timer. I wonder if I've got it here. It's like here it is. For anyone who's watching, the cheapest timer you can buy on Amazon
yeah,
is often what I use. And the power of this to get me, like, once the timer's going, you really have to start. Even if you just write, I don't know what I'm going to write about today. And there's a few of mine that I say it slightly differently, but essentially, once, because suddenly a minute has passed and I'm like, that's a 12th of my time. I have to start. I know if I don't start soon, there's going to be nothing, and that's going to be weird, and that's not how it works. But the first thing is something like, sometimes those posts become about the process. It's like, the first thing is, sometimes I sit here and I don't know what to write about. And I could take that out, but actually I leave it in because I think it's a cool part of the process. And I'm glad you told that story. And you've also I don't know if this was actually the thing, but you've just given people who are listening or watching a really cool writing prompt. Was your writing prompt actually the first thing you had to write each time was, I don't know what I'm going to write about today? Yeah, like, so good, because then suddenly it's not a blank page. And you're away, and you're given the permission to not know, the permission to not be perfect. It's like a really wonderful writing prompt.
Yeah, and I remember I do oodles of stuff around it, and there's something here for me as well about, and I think you've kind of pointed to this, and it's something that I try. Haha! All the coaches can write in on that one. I attempt. It is an attempt. It isn't always happening, but that thing of, if it's, and I got this from Liz Goodchild. I always have to credit her for this, where she talked about a blog can be one line or it can be 500 words.
Yeah.
And I remember when she said that to me, it was like somebody just lifted this weight.
Yeah.
And when, actually, when I do a post on LinkedIn, it couldn't be, I'm going to meet my friend and we're going to talk about X, really excited about that. Or it could be reams of what we did and how we did it and what we're planning to do next and how they can connect with me. It's like, neither's right or wrong. You just put it out and see who's resonating with it.
Yeah, it reminds me of, I used to read Seth Godin's blog a lot, and his would sometimes be really short. So, like, his is one of the most read blogs on the internet. So it's like, again, permission there. The other thing I remember my brother pointed out about Seth Godin's blog is he writes about the same stuff sometimes. So you can just repeat yourself if you want. Like, it doesn't matter. It's a blog, right? It's not like you're not going to get marked on it. No one's going to, like, fail you as a blogger. Although that's the kind of story we have. You're not going to get an F. You're just going to have another post. In my case, you're going to have another post about habits and practice and procrastination on your blog. And that's fine, because people are interested in that. And not everyone reads all of your posts and all that kind of thing.
And I guess we do have a story of someone's going to be marking this.
Definitely.
Someone's going to,
as I was saying, I was like, oh, this
get
is
a
what
big red pen and write, please do again.
Yeah, absolutely. And and also the other thought that crossed my mind then is this myth that I used to have that anything has to be original. Isn't that interesting that there's a story that only speech marks originality counts? And then in the end, I heard somebody say, might have been Michael Neal or somebody like that, say, there are no new ideas in the world.
No.
So the best you can ever hope to do is share an old idea with, your own 5% flavor or something.
Yeah.
Like, fine.
Yeah.
Perfect. Can let myself off hook for that and just write something.
When I was doing theatre, I remember somebody saying there are only 7 plots.
Yeah.
And it's like, so people can there are all these stories, but there are only 7 plots, and sometimes they're mixed up, and sometimes they're told this way or they're told that way, or you don't know what the plot is until the end, or whatever it might be, or you leave the cinema going, I have no idea what I just saw, but there are only 7 of them, and it really kind of made you go, oh, okay. So we're just repeating those same 7 stories in different ways. I mean, I think it's why I love the hero's journey so much, because I just see it in things. There it is, there it is, there it is. It's like, I think it's why Romeo and Juliet is my favorite story ever, and it's like if it's on, I want to see it because I love that story and the retelling of that story. There's probably something deeply psychological in there for me.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, somebody's probably sitting there going, we could write
people who like Romeo and Juliet, they're like this, yeah, and Swale likes Macbeth, so he's probably one of these. Yeah.
So I've just noticed the time, and
Fun, hasn't it?
I'm like, I say this a lot that we could just talk forever. But one of the things I love about you is that the conversation just flows. And I think I said this at the beginning, where you just open, you just allow things to open and to open and to open and to open. And so I would say to anybody who, if you want an experience of that expansiveness and an experience of allowing some, because what you beautifully don't go, and now do it. You just keep it opening. And I just love that. I just love it. It just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And I feel myself kind of going, oh, I've been talking to Robbie today. I feel like I can, like I'm a cowboy or something. I can just kind of walk down the street like this. I don't know what that means about me. I don't know what that says about me, but that's kind of it. But I would say to anybody who's listening and who's watching, if you want that experience, come talk to Robbie, because there's just something so beautifully held in that and so beautifully tuned in. I love how you tune into what's present and what's being explored, and that also gives the other person permission to tune in because you're tuning in. I think there's something really beautiful about this. So people want to work with you. Where can they find you? Where's the best places to find Robbie?
Yeah, I just want to catch that though, because I think it's again very, very meaningful to hear that, and it's meaningful to hear it from you. And I wanted to catch that because we've done it in this conversation, but I think it happens quite a lot, that a lot of the time, especially in the kind of work that we do, when we're talking about our families, we're often talking about why it meant that I feel like there's a level of happiness that it's not okay for me to have, right? But the reason that I know that one of the things that my family does, which is not in every family, is have conversations that go like this, that open like that. And so I'm incredibly grateful to my my parents for creating that space in the way they did, and
beautiful,
all that kind of thing. And I hope that, I think because of the way my books were written, I hope that people get that feeling from the books, and I know a little bit that they do because they've told me that. So people can find the books on Amazon and Waterstones and Blackwell's, places like that, if they want to read those. The podcasts are in all the podcast places. Hopefully they have a flavor of that as well. And everything is linked to on a slightly higgledy-piggledy website at robbieswale.com, and you can contact me there. It's worth saying as well that for coaches, there's a load of resources at thecoachesjourney.com too. And one of the things I would say as well is if you've been, I love that start. I love hearing from people where, it's such a meaningful thing for me when somebody gets in touch to say, I've been wanting to do this thing for a long time. I've had the spark, and something about what you said means I've finally taken these steps towards it, or finally done this, that if anybody ever wants to reach out and let me know about that, that's very meaningful to me. So by all means, please do. But I love these wrestling matches that we all have with ourselves. It's always interesting. So I love to hear from people.
And I think, I did, I'm aware that I was closing our conversation, and now I'm about to open something. I was doing a conversation for some coaches at More Happy about narrative styles or narrative ways of working as a coach, and I was talking about this idea that the coaching is the middle. Something's happened or something wants to be achieved, and then they find us, and then we work with them to achieve that, and then they go off, and we don't always hear the endings of things. And so there's something really beautiful when people come back and go, that chapter ended like this, and now here's my new chapter. So I really encourage you, if you've been inspired by Robbie's work, then to let him know, because we don't always know this.
Or by anyone. And Robert, if you get further into the Fan the Flames book, which I hope you do, then you'll feel some of this, because it's even more detached at that point. Lovely as it is, and glad as I am that we can create things and share them in the world. I would say for anyone, if you're ever touched by somebody's work, like no matter how big or famous or whatever you think that they are, it is a great act of great gift to write and tell somebody that, because you don't know what it's like being inside somebody. And I bet that all those people, if they ever read the genuine things, are really touched by them.
Yeah, beautiful. So you kind of hinted to my next, and part of mine. There's a whole world of beautifulness that's happening next to me around fire shamanism, around fan the
I was
flames.
excited to read about that, Robert. I can't wait to see how it unfolds.
That's all kind of. And this morning I was on a call with my my fire walk instructor, my mentor, and we're doing some work together later on this year. So I'm going to be redoubling with the fire, and I'm just like, oh, this is so good. And the book is part of that, and I'm collaborating with Zara Alam to create that, and she supported me in that piece. And what's next for Robbie? Let's do our final volley into the space. What's next for Robbie?
I don't know, and I'm quite enjoying that. So that's that thing of that I was talking about, the love and will thing. What's next for me is I'm kind of giving myself 6 months for this. I had lots of ideas. I had lots of like smart ideas about what's next, and it didn't feel right. It felt like the wrong thing. So what's next for me is I'm running an experiment right now about what happens if, instead of following what's important or smart, I follow what's interesting or like, I don't know, curious. And what that means is like it has had the effect that I hoped it would have. That it's created for me a thing that I've wanted a lot more of, which is like the thing that you named about the 12-minute method, the kind of or the letting go of the outcomes. It's created more ease. And it's also come in the middle of we've moved house, we've moved across the country, and so there is some like my only real goal for this year is about creating a beautiful home here. In fact, on this video, normally it's out of shot, but StreamYard must have a wider angle. You can see this box of like moving stuff here. For people who are on video, normally it's out of shot. I forgot to move it before we jumped on. Like that's the thing. But within that means that other things are emerging, different work, more coaching work is happening now than has over the last 2 years, because the last 2 years have been a lot about books, and some conversations like this, and some other projects I'm sure will emerge. But it's a really interesting place. If you'd asked me that at any point in the last 2 years, I'd have had this list of goals essentially. But this phase calls for a different kind of way of being. So that's what I'm experimenting with.
Beautiful. I love that. I love that. Maybe because I'm such an emergent worker, that the idea of sitting and going, so what's coming to me?
Yeah, what's most interesting today?
Yeah.
Not because I've done a lot of what's the most useful thing, or what's the thing today that's in best service of my goals. I've used those questions on a day a lot, but it's different to play with. Well, what am I interested in doing now? Yeah, it's lovely.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Robbie, for joining me. I've so enjoyed this conversation, and also this has been the first one of the year. I know we're in February, but this is my first of the year, so that also feels very warming to be sharing that with you as well.
Yeah, well, it's been an absolute pleasure, privilege. It's always very wonderful to talk with you, and I feel similarly about the conversations we have as the way you described this one. So yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much. So this is Robert signing off from Fan the Flames. And if you've liked what we've said, if something's caught your attention, then comment, then like, then share, reach out, do all the things in all the places. And I can't wait to catch up with you in the world again sometime soon. Take care, everybody.